Hello, Andrew Day.
Hey Bob, happy Earthling Day.
Same to you. It is Earthling Day, isn't it? Just
It,
about every Friday is Earthling Day, isn't it?
well, normally it is. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to say happy Earthling Day in a while because we're now back from our break. We
We're
didn't
back.
write the Friday edition of the newsletter, the Nonzero Newsletter on Substack, and the Friday edition is called The Earthling, and we
hmm
have the first issue in a month out today.
Yeah, we had a Friday newsletter last week, but it wasn't an Earthling. And we did,
Right.
we've been Earthling less. And I think it's a strong issue, don't you?
It is. There's like 9 items. It's very, substantive
And
items as well.
I don't think it's a coincidence. You tell me that this is the first issue we put out since Connor Eccles joined the team, and it's a strong issue.
Hmm.
I don't think that's a coincidence.
It definitely is not. And he made it stronger for sure.
So
Hmm.
I'm feeling okay about having surrendered three first round draft picks for him. You don't do something like that casually, but I figured this is not just a rebuilding year. We're going for the Super Bowl this year. So
Right. Yeah.
expect great things.
We trusted the process, as they say in the NBA, and now the process is bearing fruit.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, how was the reaction to your progressive realism piece? I know that we posted that last week, and then also the Washington Post printed a shortened, like abbreviated version of it, right?
Somewhat adapted, and yeah. There's actually a little in the post piece that wasn't in the original.
Hmm.
Um, it's been I got condemned by people I'm happy to be condemned by,
Mm-hmm.
mainly neoconservatives, and got, some compliments, and we're going to be doing we're going to have a call for NZN members, Non-Zero Newsletter paid subscribers, discussing foreign policy on July 31st.
Right. Yeah, that's
And this whole progressive realism thing will probably come up. Um, Now it is. I mean, I guess we have not gotten to the point where you can start a conversation without talking about Joe Biden, right? We're not to that phase of American history yet.
right. And there was the press conference last night, which I
Mhm.
definitely am wanting to get your reaction to. Maybe to set it up, we're going to talk about the press conference and the general Biden mess. But to kind of set the scene, the U.S. hosted a NATO summit this week in D.C. to
Mhm.
celebrate NATO's 75th birthday. There were some elephants in the room, so to speak. I mean, more than one. Like the war in Gaza got short shrift relative to the laser-like focus on the war in Ukraine.
Mm.
The specter of Trump loomed large. Trump has threatened to pull out of NATO. Some people in NATO countries are worried what's going to
Mhm.
happen to NATO when he comes back, if he comes back, I should say. Another elephant in the room is Ukraine clearly badly wants to join NATO, and a lot of NATO nations are hesitant to actually meaningfully move that process forward. But the biggest elephant in the room, of course, was Biden's apparent cognitive decline and the way it has scrambled American politics this election cycle. So, this press conference last night was highly anticipated. It was a chance for him to speak extemporaneously to either quell the simmering discontent in the party or screw up royally and deepen the crisis. So what were your thoughts on the press conference and on the current state of the Democratic Party?
Well, I'm old enough to remember when Gerald Ford said in the wake of Watergate, our long national nightmare is over. And I am here to report after that press conference, our long national nightmare is not over. It was so
Mm-hmm.
close to being over. It was so close to being over. Like he went into that with the betting markets at 40% that he would be the nominee as of late August.
Mm-hmm.
He calls Zelensky Putin. And then at the very beginning of the press conference, he calls his Vice President Trump. And I'm like, look, all we need is an episode of Brain Lock, like three-fourths the size of the one in the debate, the famous one, and we're
Mm-hmm.
done. And we're done. The momentum is unstoppable. But no, they get him on his two favorite topics. One is, are you going to drop out? He's got all the answers ready for that. And the other one is foreign policy. And,
Mm-hmm.
look, if I just gave you the transcript and said, do you want this person to be president? Well, you'd probably say no, but of course that's true of a Trump transcript. It's true of a lot of things. He definitely performed a lot better than in the debate. And I'm sure he's thinking, hey, I'm sure everybody told him, great job, great job. I mean, there were a number of little things. I mean, I think when he said Hamas was losing support in Gaza, he probably meant the West Bank. He
Mm.
couldn't kind of think up the proper term for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You know, but it was much higher energy. I mean, I think it's true that if you just, it's probably like the Stephanopoulos interview in that if you just go over actually every sentence, it kind of, most of it kind of seems fine. And you go over it with a fine tooth comb, you realize that there aren't many great sentences. I mean, uh, here's one. He says, I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears. I've seen, let them see me out there. Let me see them out, you know. For the longest time, it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden is not prepared to, and anyway. And
Yeah,
then
that's the key when he says anyway. I saw
he
someone
did
on
that
Twitter saying you can just control search the word anyway to find the occasions when his
when he's
voice
lost.
and his
Yeah,
mind kind of trailed off.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But way more high energy than the debate. And
Mm-hmm.
look, he knows foreign policy. And he convinced you that, look, if he was having a cabinet meeting about foreign policy and his biochemical status was whatever it was during that press conference for whatever reason, I
Yeah.
mean, he'd be able to say, approve policies and veto policies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's, I mean, it's funny. I mean, one thing that's happened since we talked, of course, was the famous George Clooney op-ed, where Clooney, who had hosted the fundraiser for him a couple of weeks ago, said, "Look, the guy I saw at that fundraiser was the same guy you saw at the debate. He's got to go, basically." And then John Favreau, I get my
Mm-hmm.
Johns mixed up. There's John Lovett, John Favreau. Are they both associated with Pod Save America?
Yeah, but Favreau is the one you're thinking of. He used to be a speechwriter for Obama. There's a rift
Mm-hmm.
between Biden people and Obama people. There kind of always has been, but that's kind of
Mm.
coming out more into the open right now.
But
Uh,
he said, "Yeah, I was at the fundraiser." And after seeing Biden, well, afterwards, my wife turned to me and said, "So what are we going to do, about Biden?" And he said, "Well, we'll wait and see how he does at the press conference. I mean, at the debate." And
That's actually a different
so,
thing than I thought you were going to say, because apparently some people in the White House were accusing John Favreau of having written Clooney's op-ed, and he
oh,
totally denies it. So yeah, there's some sort of tension there that's spilling out into the open. I mean, I
well,
think
they're also,
when he refers to the elites in the Democratic Party who are trying to kick him off the ticket, it seems like maybe he's referring to, in part, to these kind of Pod Save America people.
I think he's talking about the whole media. He's just going,
Mm-hmm.
he's playing the populist card wisely. He's trying to hang on to the union support
Mm-hmm.
and black support. And those probably are among his stronger bases of support. I don't know. But yeah, it's I mean, after the debate, the numbers during the debate, they got a little over 50. The numbers on the betting market for him settled down to about 45. That's where they are now. So he basically got about a 5-point bump in the betting markets
That
out of
he'll
the
be the
debate.
nominee, right? Not that he'll be president.
That should be the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as of late August. If you look at betting markets that put the deadline like at the election, his odds
Mm-hmm.
are lower because, I mean, for one thing, at that age, you could have a stroke, you could die, but
Mm-hmm.
also you could be, I guess you could be forced off the ticket. Now, one thing you and I talked about is one thing he may come to regret if he has a really bad week or two here. He may come to regret saying at the press conference when they ask him, are the delegates who are pledged to you, are they free to vote? Or
Yeah.
whoever, he's like, yeah, sure, that's democracy in action. I mean, that's, yeah, I mean, people had thought like he would have to, they'd said, well, he's got to drop out and release his delegates and tell them they're released. Well, he just released them. He hasn't
Yeah.
dropped out, but he's done the release part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't prep him not to say that, because they would have a good case that the delegates are pledged to vote for him. They're obligated to vote for him. But yeah, I agree. The bar was, as they say, on the floor, but I agree he cleared it. Obviously, there was stumbling at the beginning. Maybe he tripped over the bar a little bit right at the beginning when he referred to Vice President Trump. And again, I think when these slip ups happen at the beginning, it really primes everyone to look for other verbal flubs, although everyone's already kind of primed to do that in this case. So maybe it didn't matter as much. I thought he did better than in the Stephanopoulos interview. He did speak
Yeah.
in a level of detail about foreign policy that Donald Trump does not.
Oh,
I
well,
don't
yeah.
I don't like the substance of what he was saying in many cases, but the performance was certainly steady. But apparently it wasn't enough to quell this dissension in the party or prevent lawmakers from publicly calling for him to step down. I mean, shortly after the press conference ended, two more House Democrats, including the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, urged him to do so. Today, there was a Politico report saying that a bunch of Democratic lawmakers had previously drafted statements urging him to step down. Nancy Pelosi had kind of said, you know, tamped down the criticisms till after the NATO summit. So we're not like embarrassing the president while all the world leaders are here. So apparently some of those Democratic lawmakers are still considering releasing those statements. I don't know if you saw today, the New York Times reported that wealthy donors are withholding $90 million in pledged contributions to the main super PAC supporting Biden. If he stays in the race, they're going to keep those frozen, which seems like a big deal to me.
Well, so they say now. I mean, if he really does stay in the race, who
Right.
knows? But
Yeah, it's that game of chicken that you talked about with Levitz. Is
yeah.
it John Levitz?
Well, yeah, Eric. Yeah,
Oh,
and
sorry.
yeah, and what's interesting to me, this old saying, politics is downstream from culture.
Hmm.
Like this is something I think conservatives came up with because they started thinking like, the troubles with like Hollywood's dominated by liberals and so on, which was pretty true. Um, it's interesting to me the way cultural figures intervened in the game of chicken, right? Like Biden is saying, I ain't going. So if you try to push me, we're just going to blow up the Democratic Party together and everything's going to be a disaster. And there haven't been, even now, a ton of politicians who have been willing to kind of call his bluff, right?
Hmm.
And see if they really put the pressure on. He actually will step down. But George Clooney and for that matter, I think Stephen Colbert, who initially seemed kind of pro Biden, has
Yeah.
taken, Jon Stewart has done
Hmm.
devastating riffs. Um, and these people collectively command a lot of power. In addition to the actual media, um, and I really think, I mean, the New York Times. I don't know if I can find it on the homepage, but there was something. The New York Times seems to really be on kind of a jihad here. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but so it I think in the absence of those people from outside of politics, he would totally win this game. But I don't know. It's looking like it could go on a long time. I'm starting to think I'm going to have to discipline I just can't take my eyes off it, and
Hmm.
it's eating up too much time. I'm going to have to
Yeah.
do something.
I mean, some politicians are making their feelings about it known in a kind of striking way, but much more passively than the celebrities you just named. Like, did you see the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is not going to attend Biden's appearance in Michigan next week on Friday? That was
Is that
supposed to be
right?
kind of a counter event. I mean, I just saw this on Twitter. A reporter at Politico tweeted it out. Apparently, a senator and a representative from Michigan also said that they won't be able to attend. And it's like, well, okay, they're claiming scheduling conflicts, but usually when a president is in your state
Yeah,
during an election cycle, you would
yeah,
definitely go to this.
yeah. I'm committed to see a school board head in Ann Arbor, so I couldn't see the president. The that's of course notable because Gretchen Whitmer is one of the most commonly mentioned alternatives to Kamala.
And
Um,
she was
yeah,
saying positive things about Biden previously. Maybe she was one of these people who kind of wanted to hold back while the NATO summit was going on. I don't know.
I would almost be surprised if she didn't appear with him, just because by virtue of being a much mentioned alternative, doesn't she look like she's trying to undercut him, in a Machiavellian way for her
Hmm.
own advancement, which of course is going on in any event when a politician chooses not to appear with him. But I would just think it might be too conspicuous.
I mean, she seems to me like the best possible replacement. I don't know that much about her policies, but Michigan is an extremely important swing state. That's reason number one to have her, and she's a very good public speaker. I have to say, maybe we can talk about. I think, yeah, I'm definitely convinced that Biden is too impaired to be a good president, like to execute the functions of the presidency. I have no doubt about that. But I'm not as persuaded as you seem to be that he is too impaired to win the election, even relative to the other likely alternative candidates. And I think the polling kind of bears that out. There hasn't been that much of a dip in his polling, and some polls show that he's actually kind of gone up a little bit,
Well,
and
I
that
think there was a slightly bigger dip than I expected, but then it has closed up a little. I mean, he's still doing worse than he was before the debate. But yeah, there has, the polls haven't been devastating. It's just that he was in trouble to begin with, and I don't know. It just seems to me like November's a fairly long time from now. They have to either keep him in something close to bubble wrap, or he's going to have some moments, I think, that are, and even the press conference, like, okay, on balance, it went pretty well, but those two things, Zelensky, Putin, Harris,
Mhm.
Trump, that those are much easier to memify than a long press conference that goes okay. And the BBC was leading with them last night on the radio.
Right.
Uh, so
And it's
I,
kind of unfortunate because like those, especially the Zelensky Putin thing, seems like a slip of the tongue to me that I could make, that anybody could make. I mean, they're both presidents. They both have nearly the same first name. He had just
yeah,
been talking about Putin. He's probably said President Putin very many times during a NATO summit. He immediately corrected himself, or almost immediately. But I do think despite being the gaffe that I can most imagine a younger politician easily making, I do think it was like the most cringe-inducing moment I've ever seen in politics. It was horrible. The world leaders were all standing behind, the NATO leaders were standing behind them. They didn't know whether to clap. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Zelensky looked taken
let's,
aback.
let's have a big round of applause for President Putin. The Well, the funny thing is how parallel the two things of brain lock are. In both
Mhm.
cases, it's almost like conflating like opposites. It's like Putin is Zelensky's adversary. Trump is on the ticket that's adversarial to Kamala Harris. And I would be interested to know, are there neurologists who kind of recognize that as
Mhm.
anything, conflation of opposites? I mean, more the other thing, I mean, you could go further and say, like, look, Trump and Putin are Biden's two biggest rivals in the world. And
Mhm.
in both cases, he was talking about his teammate in fighting them.
Yeah.
Zelensky's his teammate. There's this weird parallelism. I mean, at some point, I guess I'm asking you to get Freudian about it, but
Right.
uh, it was strange.
I do want to say there's at least one poll that has Biden doing a little bit better than he was before the debate actually happened. I mean, I think it came out today. Yeah, it's this NPR PBS
Hmm.
NewsHour Marist poll. I can just kind of read from it. It says Biden actually gained a point since last month's survey, which was taken before the debate. In this poll,
Hmm.
he leads Trump 50% to 48% in a head-to-head matchup, but Biden slips when third-party options are introduced. I'll kind of skip a little bit. They're saying it's still within the margin of error, this lead he has over Trump, I mean. The poll also found that at this point, no other mainstream Democrat who has been mentioned as a replacement for the president on the ticket does better than Biden. Obviously, that has a lot to do with name recognition. So maybe there is a candidate out there who, if they were introduced to the public,
Hmm.
would outperform Biden. But I think there is a bit of an overreaction. Again, I don't think there's an overreaction to how troubling it is that this guy is president. Because surely
Hmm.
America, you know, it's a big country. Surely we have someone who could do the job better than Biden given his cognitive state. But it seems to me that the voters are still considering voting for him.
Yeah, no, the numbers I'm looking at the 538 average, and the gap got up to 2.5. This is the aggregate, and they're very careful about which polls they use. It got up to 2.5 point difference after the debate, and now it's at, wait, I can't figure it out. Is it 2 point? It's 1.9. So there's been some convergence. Now, according to this poll, the day of the debate, it was 0.7. So it's still a lot worse than that for Biden. But, there's a lag. So
Mm-hmm.
it may be still getting better. I mean, maybe people who heard about the debate tuned into the Stephanopoulos interview and said, it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but no, I mean, part of my feeling is just he's clearly declining at a
Yeah,
pretty rapid rate, it seems to me. Like, no way. I just think no way he's up to the job 2 years from now. But
I
and I
agree.
also feel for that reason, I kind of feel like when people say, okay, he'll probably lose to Trump, but so will Kamala, and whatever alternative you get to Kamala probably will, because getting that alternative will divide the Democratic Party and embitter people like Kamala and so on. I mean, my feeling is, okay, so let's just stipulate that Biden has a 25% chance against Trump, Harris has a 25% chance, and whoever else has a 25% chance. I mean, and this may be close to truth that the Democrats are
Mm-hmm.
just screwed. Okay. So what do you do? Well, I would say do the right thing. Like, what is best for the country and the world in the long run, and probably hints for the Democratic Party? I
Mm-hmm.
would say that's option three, not Biden, not Harris. Get somebody who could do a good job if they're president. I think that includes Gretchen Whitmer. Uh, I like a Whitmer Cory Booker ticket for like balance and to you know for various things. But I just think it's like all bets are off. Who knows? Get some, get the person who would do the best job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe by way of segueing from this conversation about Biden and the press conference to the lead item in today's Earthling, which is about Israel, Palestine, and specifically the West Bank. I just wanted to point out one thing that's kind of annoying to me about that was annoying to me about Biden's press conference and about other statements that he and other members of the White House have made is compared to how they talk about Russia, Ukraine, from my perspective, they say pretty much the right things about Israel, Palestine. Like they say, well, the only solution ultimately to this is going to have to be a political solution that involves the Palestinians getting their own state. And we need to be concerned about the humanitarian problem and reducing civilian casualties. And oh, yeah, Netanyahu has an ultra conservative government that makes all of these things more difficult. They say all the right things, but they seemingly don't accomplish anything toward those apparent ends that they lay out. Compared to with Russia, Ukraine, where he basically just says, "Oh, I have no reason to talk to Putin. Why would I
Hmm.
negotiate? You know, we're just going to dig in." Um, that's just one of the things that annoyed me about last night in terms of the substance. Everyone was watching the performance to see if he was gonna like his mind was gonna be working, but the substance was also kind of interesting, I thought. But so yeah, let's talk about the lead item in today's Earthling, which, as I said, is about the West Bank. And Bob, it was your idea to write about the surge recently of the number of West Bank Palestinians who have been displaced from their homes. And we have a striking graph showing the increase since October 7th. This month, Israel approved the building of housing units in dozens of West Bank settlements and announced the seizure of more land in the West Bank than it's taken in the last 15 or more years combined. And we have a graph showing that as well. And Clark McGillis made the graphs. People should go check them out on the website, the Nonzero
Yeah, the
Newsletter.
the graphs. I mean, that's one reason I wanted to do this item is because when you look at the actual data along these two dimensions, okay, the UN keeps numbers on how many Palestinians in the West Bank are displaced each week.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do the graph, look at the graph, first of all, huge difference between now and before October 7th, but also just lately, kind of like the last couple of months, after a little bit of a lull, there's been an uptick. Meanwhile, within the last 10 days, I guess, you've had the two things you alluded to, which is the authorization of a lot of new homes in existing settlements, plus the announcement that they are, taking another 5,800 acres of West Bank land and just calling it, state land. They're just
Hmm.
taking it, and that will ultimately be for settlements. And you look at that graph, and it's amazing. I mean, this is like it's so far out of proportion to any year ever. I think certainly, I've seen the numbers back to 25 years. It's just it's unbelievable. And I mean, it gets back to what you said. You made a good point. Like on the Middle East, the administration kind of says the right things. It's just that they show no interest in actually doing. I mean, if they actually cared, they would like make a big deal. Look, if they actually cared, they would say to Israel, in a world where they felt free of political constraints, which of course is not the real world. But I mean, if they really, really cared, they could say to Israel, God damn it, no, cancel that land theft,
Yeah.
and those new the new housing construction, or we'll do X, Y, or Z. But they don't spend any political capital whatsoever.
I have a
Uh,
couple points about that. First, it's probably worth noting they did slap some more of these sanctions on some extremist West Bank settlers yesterday, but
mhm.
that's not really an example of expending political capital. And another thing I noticed during the press conference is that one of the reporters asked Biden if he had any regrets or what his regrets were with regard to Israel, Palestine, and the Gaza war. And I thought there was something really revealing in his answer where at one point he said, and hey, I'm really popular in Israel. My opinion polls in Israel are great, which I thought was
Yeah,
really revealing because clearly he didn't interpret the question as saying how I heard it, like, do you regret not using leverage to
right,
reduce civilian casualties? He was really
right.
thinking of the criticism from the right on his Israel policy. Like that was front of mind clearly based on his answer.
Yeah, that's an old reflex of his, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but just to be clear on the dynamic here, so the Palestinians are being displaced because settlers are attacking them and their property. And the more settlements you build, the more settlers there are, and the more heavily you populate settlement, the more settlers there are, close to more Palestinians, and just the more this stuff happens, so long as the Israeli government is basically fine with it, which they are. It's been documented that soldiers sometimes participate in the ethnic cleansing, and other times they just stand by, and there are videos of them standing by and actually, uh, if anything, standing guard so that settlers can commit terrorism against Palestinians. Um, and that's and nobody's talking about it. I mean, partly because the people who who might otherwise talk about it are talking about Gaza, and partly because a lot of people like Biden and Blinken and Sullivan and everybody in the administration uh, don't really want to talk about either one.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but it's a good.
Um,
People should check out the graphs. Go to the Nonzero Newsletter. Just look at these two graphs in the lead item.
mhm. And you want to talk also about Gaza now? Because we don't have a big item on Gaza, but we do have a nice quote from the former head of Britain's foreign intelligence agency,
Hmm.
basically saying something a point that we've made in the Non-Zero newsletter and that you've made many times, which is that you can't just play whack-a-mole against Hamas and Gaza. Like there is a downside to the way that Israel is going about it. When that whack-a-mole involves like leveling a bunch of buildings and killing a bunch of civilians in the process. And he had a nice line. I don't have it in front of me. I can pull it up. It's a long quote, so I won't read the whole thing. But one thing he says is one Israeli told me that 60% of Hamas fighters are orphans from previous conflicts. Well, there's a lot more orphans that will line up to register for future Hamas battalions. And he said this in the course of answering a question from Gideon Rachman, the foreign policy commentator at Financial Times, about whether there was an end to the Gaza war on the horizon. And he said that, well, Hamas is diminished, but they are going to be able to reconstitute. And this is one of the major reasons why they will be able to.
Yeah. And I mean, over only the last few days, I think Israel, didn't they issue an evacuation order for like all of Gaza City? I mean, that's the big city in the north, right? I mean, I'm not an expert in Gaza, but and that had been depopulated, it had been evacuated once. And, then people slowly returned some big fraction of the population, and now Israel's telling them all to leave. I heard that a lot of them are just saying, "Screw you! This is getting old. We'll take our chances." And the city's not actually emptying out. But I don't know. You would think at some point the Biden administration might do something, and you would be wrong.
Right. Yeah, I guess they were evacuated in May, and then you're right. A couple of days ago, another evacuation order was issued for Gaza City. I saw that Haaretz had a what seemed to be a deeply reported article about ways in which Netanyahu has sabotaged potential hostage deals. It kind of shed a little bit of light on that weird situation when Biden kind of publicly came out saying there's this deal that Israel created and transmitted to Qatar, I believe. I mean, I'm presenting it, and then Israel seemingly rejected the deal, which Biden had presented as an Israeli proposal. But apparently Netanyahu was doing things like leaking very selective and misleading classified information to his allies like Smotrich, the kind of far-right finance minister, and to the media to kind of gin up Israeli opposition to potential hostage deals, to make it seem like whatever number they were considering, whatever the highest number they were considering for how many Palestinians they would release, he would say that number and maybe even exaggerate it to get people opposed to any deal. Sometimes people in his war cabinet would be more open to the idea that Hamas might actually make a deal, and he would come out with some statement that, from what they've seen, Hamas is delusional. They're not ready to make any kind of deal that we can agree to. So people should look that up. It's in Haaretz. It was an interesting read.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's funny because everyone has said from the beginning, look, it's in Netanyahu's political interest to continue the war. He doesn't want it to end. And I mean, Biden is just kind of naively hopeful, it seems. I mean, he was in the press conference, he talked about like, I've got this thing, it's teed up and ready to go. We're determined to see it through. Look, it could happen this time, but this is like the fifth time he's tried to kick the football, and BB's moved it every time.
Right. Yeah, and probably BB sees an opportunity here to kind of stick it to Biden. If he can affect the election in any way, I'm sure he would rather be dealing with Trump right now.
He'd rather have Trump.
So do you want to move to overtime? In overtime, I'm going to ask you about your book on artificial intelligence, and we've got a bunch of other items to discuss.
If that doesn't get them to sign up as paid subscribers of Nonzero Newsletter, hearing about my impending book, I don't know what will. What else can we promise? There's actually a lot of stuff in the Earthling.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about all of it. I mean, we're going to talk about NATO week and NATO expansion in Russia. We'll talk about Iran's new reformist president and the apparent unwillingness of the White House to negotiate with him.
AI shallow fakes. AI carbon emissions. Yeah. And who knows what else? It's a zany place, the Overtime Zone.
It is. And to access this overtime segment and all other exclusive audio content, just become an NZN member at the Nonzero Newsletter on Substack.
All right. And thanks. Also, if you don't want to do that, you could always smash the like button.
Right.
And if you like the podcast, you could rate and review us. And if you don't like it, that would be helpful. You could not.
Okay, let's go to overtime.
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NZN member at nonzero.substack.com.